Hi everyone, I'm Tim, welcome to my shop, and today we're going to be starting a mission style end table build. And I'm going to try to do things a little bit differently this time. Rather than do one video with the entire build process, I'm going to try to split it up and do a few different sort of works in progress parts to the build. So hopefully you enjoy the new format and it gives you a little bit more introduction about my build process for everything. Okay, so let's get right into it. The first step is just the initial planning and design, and I actually have some fairly specific parameters and dimensions for this build. I'm building it to hold a dollhouse for my daughter, actually, and the dollhouse was built by my grandfather before he passed away a number of years ago, specifically to be given to my children, so it's kind of deserving of a nice table to sit upon, and it has to be the right dimensions so that she can play with it. I don't have a whole lot of criteria for the overall style. The room that it's going to be in is pretty nondescript, so it can pretty much be anything that I want it to be. My long-term goal is to build a Morris chair, so I want to try the mission style out and make it sort of mission style, arts and craftsy look to it, and that should match the room that it's going to be in pretty well. Okay, and with the initial planning kind of out of the way, let's go ahead and head inside to the computer and we can take a look at our modeling software and start the actual design process.
So here we are at the computer. I use Blender as a 3D modeling program just because that's what I'm familiar with. But you could use SketchUp or any other program you want, or just draw it. Doesn't really matter. This is just what I do. The step actually isn't necessary if you're already working off of a plan, but because I'm putting my own design together, I wanted to try to get the dimensions right before cutting all the wood. So I started with the top just because I knew the dimensions there that I needed to match the dollhouse. I also knew how high I wanted it just so that my daughter could play with it. So adding the legs was pretty easy as well. But getting the proportions looking right was a little bit tricky. I played around with different leg thicknesses until I got something that I think should look nice, and then I started adding some nice other elements to it. I knew I wanted a drawer, but with the short table, I didn't want it too tall, so I sort of played around a little bit with the apron height to see if I could get a drawer out of it. And then finally, because it's a mission style or a arts and crafts style piece, I added the slots in on the sides and just played around with the number and the width of them. Once I was happy with the overall proportions, I went ahead and cleaned up the mesh a little bit off camera, did a few renders to show off the final design, and then, rendered it out. Overall, I think it looks pretty nice and should fit the need pretty well. It's always interesting to see how these 3D models will look in real life. So I'm excited to get started actually building the thing. Okay, well, we're here in the Jeep and we are on the way to the lumber yard to pick up some of that white oak. And I have my cut list ready to go. We're looking for something like 6 or 7 board feet, but we'll probably end up with just a 8 or 10 foot 8/4 piece of white oak. So we'll see you when we get back. So fast forward a couple of months and I have my lumber here. It's been sitting in the shop for a couple months just acclimating. It's 6/4 white oak, and I had them run it through the planer just so I could sort of see what we were working with, but I just wanted to show you some of the layouts that I've done. The first thing I did was go through and kind of mark all the knots that I don't want or that I kind of want to avoid cutting through if I can. There's not a whole lot of them actually, it's pretty clean. But the other thing, the next biggest piece is going to be the top, and that's going to be kind of the most important. So I kind of picked out the area that I like the best out of both boards. So I like the figure through here. So that's going to be the top, and it's going to be book matched, so it's going to open it up. And then the next step was finding a nice clean section for the legs. You want nice straight grain for those legs. So I used this section through here, and the legs are 1.25 inches square, so I should have plenty of thickness on the edges here. So I went ahead and marked off the 4 legs. I used the edges just because it was slightly straighter grain. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4. In the middle, I can probably get some of the side rails out of that. So that should be okay to go through the center of that. A couple more pieces, back apron drawer fronts, and I basically went through and just printed out a cut list based on the computer diagram that I had drawn up, and just marked them off, avoiding some of the knots that we had seen before. I'm not sure if you can see these lines. Actually, it's hard to see. But the other thing that I'm hoping we can do is these stiles here. So I got plenty of thickness here to make the stiles 1 inch, which is what I'm planning for. And then they're going to be about 1/2 inch wide. So I'm hoping just to take it through here and actually maybe get some quarter sawn out of these pieces. So we'll see how that goes. The other thing that I do for rough cutting like this is I give myself about 1/4 inch, which is, well, between 1/8 and 1/4 inch, which is a little bit heavy, but we're going to go ahead and plane that down anyway. So I have a couple of marks so I know where I can't go out of when I'm doing my sawing. So, all right, next step is the rough sawing of everything. We start the rough sawing here. Really nothing fancy, just a couple of sawhorses and a handsaw. I think this saw is about 8 points per inch, but I could really do it a little bit less than that. This felt like it took a really long time to get through, and I was tired afterwards. The one pointer I can give is to do the long rip cuts first before you do the cross cutting while the piece is nice and long. It just makes it easier to hold that. And then you go back and do the cross cuts to saw off the thin strips that you made. You can of course do all of this with a circular saw or a jigsaw, but if you're planning on using the table saw to go through it, just be sure that you have a flat edge first, otherwise the saw is going to bind up on you. I had a few pieces to resaw as well, including the top that you can see here, because I'm planning on book matching that. And I got to use the frame saw, which I love using. It just kind of eats through the wood. And here you can see I kind of flip the piece up and down and back and forth, and I eventually had to use a shim to keep the kerf open so that I could push the saw through. There seemed to be some stress on that section of the wood, so the kerf was binding up on me. So flattening it may be a challenge later, but I think that I have enough thickness to have about a 1/2 inch thick top, so that should be all right. And I was really excited to get through this piece, actually. I did the aprons and bottom braces as well, but they were a lot quicker to get through. This all went a little wonky here in the center, but it was pretty easy to peel apart when it was all done. And once the pieces are all rough sawn, it's time to start planing everything down to their final dimensions. With all the pieces rough cut to size, I work on planing everything down to their final dimensions. And this step is really tedious, so I actually probably dislike this step most of all. I typically don't do this all at once, but rather as I need the pieces, I'll go through and do each one by one. But I tried to film this part in real time so that you can see how long it takes to get a couple of flat faces and then a square edge. For this small piece, which is one of the front rails, it takes probably 4 or 5 minutes to get close enough in order to start the assembly. So I normally start with a couple of swipes of the jack plane just to get rid of the saw marks. It has a pretty aggressive cambered iron to it. And then I switch to the jointer plane like you see here to get a nice flat face. And I rely a lot on the sound. So if you listen to the sound that the plane makes and then also look at the shaving to make sure you have a full length, full width shaving, then you know that the face is flat. Once that's established, I mark the thickness with a marking gauge and then flip it over to plane it down to the final thickness. And I actually don't need a 4-squared board here for this piece, so I don't really bother checking the squareness now. If it's close enough, then that's good enough for me. As I plane down to the right thickness, you can see that I'm constantly checking the marks both by eye and then also kind of I feel the corners. Sometimes the marks can be hard to see, especially with oak like this. But as you get close to the marks when you're planing down, you can typically feel the gauge line. And then you know that you're pretty much done when you get little strings on the corners of the face that sort of peel up as you plane back and forth. And after a quick check with the square, I go ahead and mark the flat faces, and then I move on to the next one. So that's about it for the first part. If you found this section a little bit slow, hopefully the joinery and the assembly in the next part will be a little more exciting for you. If you like what you see, please go ahead and subscribe. You can find me all sorts of places online. I'm most active on Instagram at The Wireless Woodworker, and then also on Twitter at The Wireless WW. Or you can go straight to the website at thewirelesswoodworker.com. Thanks for watching.